You're listening to the podcast for all of the news, notes, and breakdowns for your Ohio State Buckeyes. This is Sons of the Shoe with Nick Wilson and Spencer German.
Sons of the Shoe is back as we get you ready for what is going to be a massive, massive showdown in the Big Ten. Ohio State, Indiana at the Shoe. Saturday afternoon. It should maybe be a night game, but we know how it goes with these big noon kickoffs for whatever reason. So it's a noon game, but it's still going to be fun nonetheless. And really, this one sets the stage for both these teams' potential playoff opportunities, and obviously sets the stage for whatever the Big Ten championship game is likely to look like, whether it's an Ohio State rematch with Oregon or Indiana sneaking in and being the other representative for the Big Ten. So it's a lot of stakes. It's a big game. It's exactly what you want for your November schedule of college football. And to help us preview such a monumental matchup in the Big Ten, we do have a guest this week, Zach Osterman, who covers Indiana athletics over at the Indy Star, joining us on the show. Zach, so grateful for your time, my man. I'm also super excited about this matchup because I don't know that anybody at the beginning of the season looked at this one and thought like, man, by the time Ohio State and Indiana play, you're going to be getting two teams that are ranked in the top 5, one's undefeated, and there's potential Big Ten championship and title hopes on the line here.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think there was optimism around Indiana this season. I forget what their Vegas preseason win total was. I think it might have been 5.5. So I think it was kind of like maybe they'll be bowl eligible, maybe they won't. But I mean, I picked them to win 8 games. I don't think I was necessarily alone in feeling like there was kind of a more optimistic side to this season with the schedule, with Curt Cignetti's history, with what he did in the portal, all those kinds of things. But I'm not going to sit here and pretend I saw 10-0, and obviously, not just 10-0, but the way Indiana's done it. Somebody asked Ward Manuel on Tuesday night about how far BYU fell, and he was diplomatic about it, but he kind of said, like, they lost a game and they also had some escapes. Basically, the Michigan game aside, Indiana hasn't really had that. I mean, they have just kind of wiped everybody away. One of the best margins of victory, kind of on average in the country. And so both the record and the way Indiana's done it have caught, I think, all of us off guard.
Zach, I guess along those lines, just what has impressed you the most about this Indiana team and the run that they've gone on to get to 10-0 to this point?
I mean, it's simplistic, but it is kind of the dominance, and you can kind of go game by game with it. Like against UCLA, I think it was like 14 points, 7 points, 7 points, 14 points spread across the 4 quarters. Obviously, the Nebraska game, we all thought that's a game where we're going to kind of learn which of these teams is more real, because I think it's easy to forget now. Nebraska was 5-1 and ranked in the coaches poll coming into that game. And, Indiana was up 28-7 at halftime and lost Curtis Rourke and actually won the second half by an even wider margin. They won that game 56-7. And then the Michigan State game, was maybe the one in terms of kind of two-way dominance. Indiana goes down 10-0 in that game and scores 47 unanswered points, blocked 2 punts, 7 sacks, 15 tackles for loss. Just how sort of like consistently I've seen Indiana teams in the past that were, maybe really good at a handful of things. And so they could throw the ball well, turn teams over, pressure the quarterback, which meant they could, force some mistakes and then capitalize on those mistakes. Or, Indiana teams that obviously had explosive passing attacks or, were really opportunistic at times. I've never covered an Indiana team that was just kind of this clean and fundamentally sound and therefore, incredibly difficult to kind of live with in all phases. Offense, defense, special teams, like this is just a really, really good football team.
So let's talk about last week's matchup, or I guess, before the bye. Michigan's defense in that second half, I mean, it caused problems. It was, I think, a lot of the pressure getting to Curtis Rourke, like the offensive line, defensive line did a lot there. Offensive line a problem for Indiana, you think, going up against Ohio State? Like, is that a concern here coming into this game?
I mean, it hasn't been this season. I think what was surprising about that game, Indiana lost its starting left guard late in that week. And so you thought maybe the offensive line would have some trouble, especially because, I mean, I guess we'll find out this weekend. I think Ohio State's a better defense. I do wonder if Michigan has a better front four. And I think that Indiana was really struggling, but it was kind of surprising how much Indiana was actually struggling to block the edges rather than the interior. And the way that game, like Indiana throws an interception on the first play of the second half, all it takes is kind of a couple quick drives and suddenly you're out of your offensive rhythm. Indiana's obviously had time to kind of bet in, their replacement at left guard. They've actually had to replace both their starting guards. Now they lost one in fall camp. But I don't think it is unreasonable to look at that Michigan game and say, this is the first time Indiana saw guys that were just a little bit athletically different along the line of scrimmage, other than in spots. Like I think Nebraska's defensive line is pretty good, but not, kind of 1 through 4 with the depth behind it that Michigan put in front of Indiana. I don't think it's unreasonable to look at that as a cause for concern. And I think the question basically is, how much of that is the individual quality of some of those players? How much of that could get cleaned up during a bye week? And I think, it's probably also fair to say that was maybe the first time we've seen Indiana in a game this season where, the game gets physical and the other teams just got more depth, because I think Indiana's done a really good job of developing some young players on this roster and obviously went very portal heavy, had to. They lost a lot of players during the coaching change as often happens. But that was maybe the first time that you felt a little bit like you were watching Indiana face a team that could just stay fresher, snap to snap, and it make a difference, late in that game. And Indiana's defense played really well. Obviously, Michigan's not very good offensively this season, but I think Indiana pressured Davis Ward on 21 of 34 dropbacks, which is just a crazy number. And rightly, I think Indiana's defense, got a lot of credit and a lot of praise for that. But, that is, I don't think it would be unreasonable to look at the way Indiana moved the ball or didn't in that Michigan game. And it was kind of a funny game, too, because at halftime, Indiana had 17 points and something like 230 yards. So, broadly speaking, it was all kind of going fine. And then it's in that second half, there's the interception. It sort of feels like they lose that rhythm a little bit. There's a couple big drops. Elijah Surratt, dropped a pass he would normally catch that probably would have set up a touchdown, and so suddenly it just feels like you miss just a little bit and the other team just kind of gets to dominate the ball, run the ball a lot. It's going to be interesting to see what kind of got cleaned up and what didn't or what couldn't get cleaned up through the bye week for that offensive line.
Zach, give us the scouting report a little bit on Curtis Work. Obviously transferred from Ohio and has been fantastic for this Indiana offense. And we know he presents some challenges. What are some of the things that you think he can take advantage of and do well in this matchup against Ohio State?
Yeah, I don't want to say he can make all the throws, but I mean, he can make just about any throw he needs to. And, Indiana is a pass-first offense. Kurt Cignetti will say that. Indiana's run the ball really well this season, kind of by committee, but Cignetti has said many times, like, I used to run the ball all the time. That's not what we do anymore. Even in that Washington game where Rourke was out with a thumb injury, Taven Jackson, we all thought Indiana's going to run the ball, make it easy for him. And I think 5 of Indiana's first 7 offensive snaps were passes. Like, it's what the offense does. Rourke's really good in the RPO game, very accurate, very efficient. Makes made a lot of the right decisions. Indiana, I'm fascinated by how Indiana attacks Ohio State because, this is probably the best defense Indiana's seen. I think it's without a doubt the best secondary Indiana's seen. And probably, like, no matter, I don't know how many teams Indiana could reasonably play even in the postseason that would have a better secondary than what Ohio State has. And Indiana kind of, it does a lot of short route, timing routes, slants, swing, screen, gets things moving on the edge, gets receivers moving downhill. Indiana's a great perimeter blocking team. But then Indiana also likes, with some of its a little bit more explosive receivers, guys like Omar Cooper, Surratt, once in a while somebody like Keyshawn Williams or Anderson Kobe to kind of do some of these sort of, two-man route combinations where it does attack a safety. Do you want to attack Caleb Downs? We'll see. That's that, and I don't think Indiana's going to play afraid of anybody, but you have to respect the opponent. And I think that the question you're going to have is what does Indiana feel is available to it, and what can Indiana feel like it can open up against such a good secondary and such a talented, sort of athletically gifted group, and a proven group, because it's not like, I think Indiana is more on offense on par with Oregon than Penn State, but it's not like they haven't seen high level athletes, NFL prospect receivers and backs and skill guys. But Rourke in general, he doesn't move around a ton. He'll scramble if there's space. But he is a pocket passer by trade, and there aren't a ton of throws he can't make. That Michigan game notwithstanding, he's been really good against pressure this season. He is, I know this is something I've seen Ohio State fans talking a lot about. He is excellent throwing back shoulder routes, and he's got some receivers that are really, really, really good running them. So if you cover a guy like Surratt one-on-one on the outside, Indiana will try to take that shot. But just generally speaking, he's the kind of quarterback that once he gets into a rhythm, it's hard to break. And I think that was, again, maybe one of those things that's just a little concerning if you're Indiana about that Michigan game, was it felt like the first time you saw Rourke kind of in that rhythm, offense moving fine in the first half, couple really good drives, and then he loses it and can't really get it back.
So we know Indiana's offense can be dangerous. How does a defense swing this game into their favor then?
I guess the news broke last night about Spencer McLaughlin. I'm pronouncing that right?
Yeah, Seth McLaughlin. Yeah,
Seth McLaughlin. I'm sorry.
All good. All good.
I haven't had coffee yet this morning.
You're expected to remember the Indiana players. It's okay.
Well, I'm lucky if I remember my kids' names someday. But obviously, Ohio State's had some other injury issues along its offensive line. This is the best defensive line I've ever covered, and I didn't necessarily expect to say that in the preseason. Indiana brought some promising pieces in, some guys from JMU. And this was kind of the profile of defense that Brian Haynes coordinated for Curt Cignetti at James Madison. Stop the run, pressure the passer. Indiana didn't have a ton of depth along that defensive line. They added some in the spring portal window, which I think was important. And they've developed some too with, again, if you're talking about developing depth, a guy like Jacob Mangum-Farrar, a guy like Tyrick Tucker, Marcus Burris. But Indiana is one of the best pass rushes in the country. They're very good against the run, and they are really, really good rushing the passer. And the reason why is they don't really have to get creative or use extra bodies along the front line. Like Indiana's front four creates a lot of the pressure and a lot of the havoc and a lot of the opportunities for, run stuffs, tackles for loss, things like that, just with a four down rush or a 4-man rush. Mikael Kamara obviously has the numbers, and he's been, probably as good as any pass rusher in the league this season. James Carpenter is really solid, can play kind of all the way along the line. Linnell Carr has been very good. CJ West, who's a Kent State transfer, has come along, I think, the last 4 or 5 weeks, because he was a spring transfer, so he wasn't in for spring camp. So I think it took him a little bit longer to kind of get up to speed with certain things. The last 4 or 5 weeks, he's been playing outstandingly well. And then Indiana's got kind of 3 linebackers for 2 spots back there behind them: Aiden Fisher, Jalen Walker, and a guy named Isaiah Jones, who are all just really good at kind of filling holes, stopping the run, and then just kind of, being very mobile, particularly Walker against the pass. So the point is, it's the first Indiana defense I've ever really covered that could control the line of scrimmage with 4. And obviously, if you can do that opens. Sorry, that's my Outlook dinging. If you can do that, you can, that frees you up to do so much else. If you've got 7 defenders, you can be more creative with how you attack the run. You obviously have more help in coverage. Ohio State is always going to have high-level dudes along its offensive line, but Indiana is going to test kind of where that group is this weekend, especially because of the injuries and having to shuffle some pieces around. And my sense before this latest injury was that things had maybe smoothed out a little bit. But I mean, Indiana leads the league in sacks and tackles for loss, and that's not by accident. I mean, it was, the irony, I guess, if you want to say it, was they pressured a greater percentage of Michigan's dropbacks than Michigan State's. They had 7 sacks in East Lansing. They didn't sack Michigan's quarterback one time. And so the point is, whether they're getting there or not, they're going to affect the quarterback. They're going to bottle up the run. They're going to affect the quarterback, and they're going to create opportunities for guys to make plays on the back end. And that's what's worked for them so far.
Yeah, I was going to say, I noticed it stands out, like the sack numbers, the tackle for loss numbers, one of the top teams in the NCAA in general in that regard. And that certainly is going to be a challenge for Ohio State. You've talked so much about Curt Cignetti. We know how impactful he's been in getting this program to the 10-0 record that it has. He signed that extension, obviously, within the last week or so, 8 years, $8 million per year. Does the extension, you think, guarantee that Cignetti stays at Indiana? And if so, how much longer do you think he's there? Because we know these big fish come calling at some point with more money, and they're able to sort of pay the buyouts and all these different things. Is this a sign that Cignetti's here to stay for a while, or do you think it's going to end up being just maybe a shorter stint at Indiana?
I mean, I think it is. I think it's a sign of that. I think it's a slow coaching carousel this year. I think that's largely because of the House settlement and everyone knowing they're going to have to carve kind of a $20-25 million hole into their budget, immediately, essentially. And I think we're kind of entering a world where these coach buyouts just aren't quite so casually affordable anymore. And if the buyout to fire the coach is that way, then the buyout to go get the new one, and we don't know exactly what the buyout provisions of Cignetti's contract in terms of if another school were to want to get him out of the contract so they can hire him. We don't know exactly what those are yet. Indiana hasn't released the whether it's a contract, a memorandum of understanding, what kind of the document that everybody signed and is working off of here. But the other thing I would say is Cignetti's 63. I think he's always relished, the idea of jobs like this. I mean, the only time he really wasn't in a job where he was kind of at least something of an underdog was when he had JMU in the FCS, even bringing them up to the Sun Belt. I know that it's easy to look back on that time now and say, oh, well, JMU was always really good. But I mean, a lot of people thought James Madison was really going to struggle, the way most teams do, stepping up to the FBS, and they didn't. I think he enjoys, kind of a bit of this kind of underdog feel, a bit of a place where, the challenge for him is to go kind of find solutions that aren't just obviously applicable through, the portal or recruiting elite kid. Not that I don't think he'd take elite kids, but he's said since kind of he got here that his family really likes it in Bloomington. And, coaches can say that stuff, but when he signs a new contract 11 months after he signed the first one, you feel like maybe that's a sign that they are really settled and they are really enjoying it. I think the other thing that you'd say is at the end of the day, in this era, the list of schools that you'd leave Indiana for is a lot shorter, because if you're in the Big Ten or the SEC, you don't leave. I mean, yeah. Maybe a Clemson, maybe a Florida State, I guess maybe a Miami. But for the most part, if you're in one of these two conferences, and if you've proven you've got a formula that wins in one of these two conferences, you don't leave, because the combination of power and resources and opportunity. I mean, think about it just where Indiana is right now. They're 10-0. I know there's a lot of this discourse kind of being driven from the South. And believe me, I grew up in Atlanta. I know where it comes from. But a lot of this sort of, if Indiana loses to Ohio State, should they be out for a 2-loss SEC team? I don't think they will be personally, but if that's the case, but if they were in the Big 12, maybe the answer would be yes. If they were in the ACC, maybe the answer would be yes. That if they lose a game, they lose their margin for error. You don't lose that in the Big 10. That's why you don't leave the Big 10 or the SEC. So, if nothing else, I think the commitment seems there on both sides, kind of for the immediate term. And listen, everything moves so fast in college sports, you don't know what's going to happen next. But I think Indiana in general should feel good about, kind of where the direction of sort of like what the investment it has put into football has sort of returned at this point.
So real quick, because it sounded like you sort of hinted at it there. If Indiana does lose this game, you believe they will still make the playoff?
I mean, I certainly think Indiana would be well off not getting blown out in this game, creating that sort of, that sort of concern, or that sort of, just planting any seed of doubt in the committee's mind. But I'm sitting here next to some numbers I ran for something I wrote yesterday. And it's not perfect, but it's the best precedent we have. If you go through the 10 years of the 4-team playoff and you look at Power 5 conference teams that finished with one loss, and I included one year when Notre Dame had one loss, not one of them was ever ranked lower than 7th in the final college football playoff top 25. They all played in New Year's 6 games. And there's some teams in there, where the FPI numbers weren't as good, or maybe the strength of schedule numbers weren't as bad as they are for Indiana right now. Obviously, they'll get better this weekend, but they still weren't great. They were in the 50s or the 60s. And maybe that's what held them out of a 14 playoff, but it did not keep them out of it. It kept them still comfortably in the top 10. I find it hard to believe that if Indiana wins, it's a different conversation. If Indiana loses this weekend, I find it hard to believe, as long as it's competitive, that conference is going to drop, or not the conference, the committee, is going to drop a one-loss Big Ten team. I just don't think.
Yeah.
Obviously, the prestige of the Big Ten, however you want to describe the politics of the situation, and then also just frankly the way the committee has treated the conference the last 2 weeks. They've had 4 Big Ten teams in their top 5. It's clear that they think the Big Ten's upper tier is for real, and that includes Indiana.
Zach, well, first of all, I tend to agree. We're going to explore that a little bit more here on the rest of this show. But, dude, we can't thank you enough for giving us some time. Again, Zach Osterman, he covers Indiana athletics for the Indy Star. You can follow him on X at Zach Osterman. Thank you so much for the time, my man. Hopefully we get a chance to do this again at some point, but can't thank you enough for giving us a few minutes here.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
All right, we're going to take a quick break, guys. When we get back, we'll continue breaking down this matchup and talk about what Zach mentioned earlier. Big blow to the Ohio State national title hopes. Keep it locked. It's Sons of the Shoe. Spencer German, Jake Vulinec. We'll be right back. Sons of the Shoe is back. Second segment here on this preview episode, getting you ready for Indiana and Ohio State. And I just got to say, I thought that conversation with Zach was incredible. Gave some really good insight into the matchup at hand. I always think it's nice when we can get guests like that because, Jake, nobody knows these teams better than the people who cover them. And I thought he brought some good stuff to the table in terms of challenges that Ohio State could actually face. And, especially in the defensive side of the ball, because I think we all know how good this Indiana offense is under Curtis Rourke. But to get sort of the perspective of what this defense also brings to the table and some of the challenges that they could present Ohio State, I thought was fascinating as well. And I think that conversation really does set the tone for the matchup this weekend, which, by the way, according to our friends at FanDuel, Ohio State 12.5-point favorites at home. And it seems like people are of the belief that Indiana, I don't want to say they're fraudulent, but that Indiana, because they haven't faced anybody, that Ohio State's just going to be a challenge that they just cannot quite get the better of or beat this weekend, especially on the road. And there might be some truth in that, but I still believe Indiana's going to put up a really good fight in this game.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if they didn't. I mean, from Zach, defensive stuff was definitely, he never looked at Indiana as sort of a pushover defense, but I think he brought some stats to the table, and just how highly he spoke of that defensive line makes you sort of take a step back of, hey, this team might be really good on offense, but they're also not bad on defense. They're going to have to make sure that Will Howard's getting the ball out quickly and doing what he has to do. But the 12.5-point spread, I think that the Michigan game from Indiana's last matchup, that second half sort of lingering in Vegas's mind in that one, because they looked really good in the first half. That second half, Michigan sort of laid out hey, if you're going to beat Indiana, here's sort of the blueprint for it.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. And I'm sure that that Vegas is sort of picking up on that and using that as part of the reason why they feel Ohio State's just going to be the better team in this one and win by double digits. I also think, though, another factor here is the fact that Indiana's coming off of a bye week, right? So they had sort of an extra week to correct some of these things. And Ohio State now has another big injury that they're dealing with, which we will talk about. But yeah, like anytime somebody who's talking about another team or whatever comes on and says, yeah, this team's defensive line is really good or whatever, it just makes me nervous naturally because we know that we've talked about it. Like the biggest worry for this Ohio State team has continually been that offensive line up front. And when you're dealing with a bunch of injuries, it makes it even more of a daunting task, it feels like, to trust this group to be that physical team that can dominate in the trenches. And that's how you win football in at the college level, especially. So that does make me a little bit nervous. That said, I still do think like, and maybe this has implications on the Michigan game, which we will give you guys the Michigan panic meter. Jake is going to, for the first time, do the Michigan panic meter. We're popping his Michigan panic meter cherry, I guess we could say. We're allowed to say things like that on a podcast, Jake, because we're not on the air. So it's a little bit easier. It's the beauty of having a podcast. But I will say this, like, I don't want to make it sound like I'm overly confident because what we're about to talk about after this is a situation that had me just wanting to crawl into a hole and drink my sorrows away last night. But I do think that Ohio State wins by double digits. Am I willing to go to 12? I don't know. I guess I'll just say they're going to win they'll win it by they'll cover the spread. Because I just think that they're a better team and Indiana hasn't been tested maybe in this way all season. We know their schedule is a topic of conversation, which we will get into coming up. But like, yeah, I feel pretty good about thinking Ohio State's going to win this game. I might be a little bit more nervous about the games on the other side of this game in terms of what some of these things we're about to talk about mean.
Yeah, I don't even know if I'm willing to go like cover the spread. I feel like this Indiana team, offensively, they're just so good. I mean, Zach talked about throwing the back shoulder fade. Like, I know that's been a conversation in like Ohio State media here for the last like 2 weeks. Like, we've been talking about how good he can throw a back shoulder fade. I don't know. Like, when you attack, Denzel,
it's funny because Zach was talking about like what to attack in the secondary, and I just wanted to scream like Denzel Burke. That was what I was going to say.
I had a question written down. We ended up short on time, but I had a question written down of like, hey, are you essentially like, is Denzel Burke somebody that you like, it's a respect, it's a challenge for Indiana? Or is that one that you look at like, this is our target, right? Make him go prove it because he's been exposed before. So why not see if we can expose him again? I think you run into a dangerous territory of, is Ohio State going to play Denzel Burke in one-on-one coverage throughout the game? Yeah, probably several times.
Yeah.
And if they decide to try to abuse that, I don't know where that leaves Ohio State's defense. That might genuinely be hey, you're going to have to figure out a solution here and actually help out Denzel Burke a lot more than you're used to, because Curtis Rourke makes those throws. Yeah. If Denzel Burke gets beat or even like a 50-50, the ball will be there for Burke to be overpowered.
And he spreads the ball. I mean, Elijah Sarrett, who Zach talked about, has 649 yards this year. He's the top receiver on this team, 37 receptions, 5 touchdowns. He makes a lot of contested catches. Omar Cooper, who's next in line, has 474 yards, 21 receptions, 4 touchdowns. And even Miles Price has 361 yards receiving, 28 receptions. He's got more than Cooper, and he's got 2 touchdowns. So it's not like these wide receivers maybe aren't Oregon's wide receivers, but they do need to be respected. And yeah, like you worry about a matchup with Denzel Burke and what that looks like because he's struggled with inferior guys before. I'll say this. I've said earlier this week that I thought Ohio State was still going to win by double digits. I think I'm going to stand by that. I'm going to say that means like 10 points. I think they win by 10. Like they pull away late because they are the better team in the end. But yeah, like the spread being 12.5 makes me feel like it's maybe a little bit too high. Where is your head at in terms of the spread and how this game sort of plays out?
Yeah, I'd probably go single-digit win.
Okay.
I think Ohio State offensively, probably against that line that we're going to talk about here in a second, I think they probably struggle a little bit there and have to sort of ease their way into the game and figure out what they're doing and make some adjustments along the fly. So I agree. I think you sort of pull away late, but I don't know that I'm willing to give it even double digits. Like there's too much here that I look at and I'm like, Indiana could shock you in a few different ways. Like it's a game that I think Ohio State fans have rightfully now been respecting and taking this as a serious matchup.
Well, let's stop beating around the bush then, because we've put it off long enough. And the terrible news that broke this week on Tuesday night is that Seth McLaughlin, starting center for the Buckeyes, ruptured his Achilles at practice on Tuesday and is done for the season officially. Again, like so to me, Jake, like this news was as devastating as possible. Like I joked, I was actually on the air that night on 92 through the Fan, and I joked that you could find me after I get done with the show at the closest bar, just sleep at the bar, in a puddle of my own tears, drinking my sorrows away. Because like I don't mean to sound hyperbolic here, but this feels like the thing that derails your national championship hopes. I mean, dude, we were worried about this group from the start of the season, right? And then even with the Josh Simmons injury, he goes down, or he goes down, and it's like, okay, I don't know what they're gonna do. This is a real problem. And then we talked about it on Saturday, like the line was starting to sort of round into form, and it felt like this makeshift sort of unit where you moved Carson Hinsman over to a guard, and you knew Seth McLaughlin was kind of like the anchor of this group, and Donovan Jackson was doing the best he could at left tackle and doing some decent things and playing pretty well there and sort of holding down the fort for you enough. Now it's like, and that was, midway through the season or just about midway through the season, and you sort of came out on the other side okay. There were starting to be some consistency here. There were starting to be feel like there was some momentum building. And now you lose maybe the guy who's been your best lineman this season in Seth McLaughlin, guy who transferred in this offseason. It was an area of concern for you that you tried to sort of assess and address, and he's been phenomenal. And you're now stuck at the most important time of your season. Indiana, then the Michigan game, which, even though Michigan's having a down year, isn't just going to be a cakewalk, because Michigan lives rent-free in Ryan Day's head. And then a potential Big Ten title rematch against Oregon, and the whatever awaits you in the playoff, because I'm assuming Ohio State's going to make it at this point. Like, this is a disastrous scenario. Like, this is the worst possible time for something like this to happen. And now you're trying to regain traction with an offensive line that's now going to resort to some version of like an underclassman hasn't proven much, and that obviously is going to be pretty raw, and that you're still trying to sort of develop in your program. And you have to do that on the fly at the most important time of your season. Like, again, I don't mean to sound hyperbolic, but I do think this is the thing. No matter what happens from here, I do still picture Ohio State winning the next two games, getting to a Big Ten championship game, and, maybe they beat Oregon or whatever, and we'll see. But like, I do still picture that. I still picture that happening. But I think this is the thing that derails their national championship hopes. I really do.
Do I want to go there with you? Like, I don't know.
Yes, you do. You want to go there with me.
Interior offensive line, like, it's important, but like, as long as you can get three guys that sort of mesh together, I feel like it's not the biggest concern. And if we had conversations about being scared about this line before, you're still scared about this line now. Like, that wasn't going away just because Seth McLaughlin was in the middle. I'd like, yes, is it concerning? Very concerning, because I agree with you. He's probably been the best offensive lineman all year on a group who's really struggled. I don't know. You're also full of 4-star and 5-star guys who, yes, you're a little raw, you're a little young. I think you can still piece it together. And a lot of the pressure that you're going to face and the defense that you're going to face is probably going to come from the exterior and not so much through the interior. I think it again comes down to what we talked about sort of after the Northwestern game, is that Chip Kelly now has to get creative. You can't just rely on this makeshift puzzle piece together offensive line to hold up perfectly against some really good defensive fronts. Indiana, Michigan, Oregon, like, those are teams who are going to blitz. They know where the weaknesses are going to be. I think you just have to get creative. Is it an ideal scenario? No. Is it something that I'm going to say this is like the end? This is what actually derails Ohio State season? I don't think so either.
I think that's listen. The Chip Kelly point is huge, and I do think that is maybe the one. I don't even know if it's like a wild card, but the one like saving grace to all this is that you have a play caller who knows how to kind of get creative and try some different things and find the best opportunities to get the playmakers that Ohio State has the ball in space. He has done that time and time again. I am curious to see like what version of this line they sort of birth now that McLaughlin's out. I'm assuming Hinsman is going to who's played pretty well, by the way, at left guard. He's done a pretty good job. I'm assuming he just shifts back to his normal spot at center, and then maybe that paves the way for a Luke Montgomery, who's I almost called him by Seth's name, who's an Ohio guy, to sort of take over and take the reins.
You'd probably feel better, right, if it was Luke McLaughlin.
Well, I will say, like, yeah, really, if it was like his brother, yeah.
He's like, all right,
am,
bro, get in there.
I actually am intrigued by the prospect of Montgomery, because he had some pretty high expectations and was a highly scouted and recruited player from Ohio, like I said. And I think there's some potential there. So I'm intrigued by that. But I just, on a team that was supposed to be ready to win a championship, it makes me nervous. Listen, I hope that this can be some sort of, JT Barrett getting hurt in the Michigan game. I know that was a more high profile position, but like, I hope this can turn into some like magical, hey, the replacement is still good enough to win you a national championship, and this doesn't end your title hopes type of thing like we saw in 2014. I pray that that's the case. I pray that Ohio State can come this. But like, you lose Josh Simmons, it's one thing. You lose Josh Simmons and Seth McLaughlin, who have been your best two linemen this year. That's another thing. Like, it's creating it's perpetuating a problem that you were already going into the season very, very thin in those areas and on the offensive line. And now you got to try to overcome that even more so against, mind you, like the best teams you're going to play all season in Indiana, Michigan, potentially Oregon, and then whatever the playoff is going to look like for you. It just feels like a lot to overcome with so many injuries to an area of this team that was already sort of the weak spot on this roster.
Yeah, I'm excited about Montgomery, I'll be honest, because I read a little bit about him once I figured that's who was, because I same boat, right? Hinsman probably slides back to center, and Montgomery, because if not, I think you're playing a redshirt freshman at center. So I don't think we're going there. If we're going there, we got a real problem. But Montgomery, like in high school, he played tackle. He also started high school as a tight end. Like, he's one of the most athletic guys that you're going to find. He's 6'4", he's over 300 pounds. The dude's a walking unit, okay? Like, he's a unit. I think if you give him some space and let him go show why he's athletic, pull him a couple of times in the run, maybe just let him get out, get ahead of steam if you can, I think you see something there. But yeah, like, we already knew the offensive line was a problem. I think it's just more concerning now, but you still have the same concerns. Like, what is a center in theory doing other than delivering a clean snap and assisting in the blocking game, right? Like, making the right reads. Like, being a center is essentially, I'm very rarely one-on-one unless I'm faced with a blitz. And
that's fair.
I sort of chip and I help out. Like, not to discredit centers, right? I played offensive line. Like, your center is very important. But in terms of actually like creating gaps and making holes, it's essentially, hey, make the right read and make sure you get a good chip in. I think you just slide Hinsman over there and he'll be perfectly fine. He's not going to be McLaughlin, but he'll be good. They just have to develop a little bit of chemistry with Montgomery. I'd be more concerned than pass blocking on the outside, sort of Donovan Jackson and Luke Montgomery paired side by side.
Yeah. Well, and maybe that's the biggest point here is like, yeah, you move Hinsman inside, great. But the bigger problem then becomes, okay, do you trust Luke Montgomery to sort of hold down the fort at left guard as well as Hinsman has? And that's where your questions kind of reside, is like, okay, maybe you're not as worried about the center position, but you're worried now about it, like the concern kicks to that left guard spot where you were starting to see some consistency with Hinsman playing so well in that spot specifically. So I guess to your point, like maybe that's where the real concern sort of comes in, but it's just like testing the limits of an already weak position group across the offensive line in general for Ohio State. And that's what has me a little bit nervous about it. And obviously worried about what this means for any national championship hopes that the Buckeyes might have. All right, guys, we're going to take another break as we try to reconcile our emotions from this terrible, terrible loss for the Buckeyes. How are you feeling about the Buckeyes title hopes after losing Seth McLaughlin, another offensive lineman done for the season? Are you still thinking a title is in the cards, or is this going to be a big shot to those aspirations? You can let us know at the 92 The Fan YouTube channel, and of course on Twitter at Spencito_, at Vulinec Jake, a new Twitter handle for Jake. He gets to become the co-host of Sons of the Shoe, and he just felt like he needed to get a new Twitter handle or something. I don't know. I don't know what it is. Really, it was that you got hacked?
Yeah, my X support just great. I'm sitting there, I get a little notification up the top, and it's like, log in from Bradenton, Florida. I'm like, I don't know anybody in Bradenton, Florida. And then I was locked out. No confirmation. They didn't have to send me an email, even though I had an email linked to the account. Didn't matter. And then X was like, by the way, not allowed to talk to a real person. They just said, wait, the email was changed? You don't have access to the email? We can't tell it's you. How are we going to tell us what the email is? It's like, no, you let them change my email.
Oh man, Elon Musk.
We're rocking
Elon Musk's Twitter.
We got 2-factor authentication now. I mean, I'm taking no risks here. X has now become an absolute lockdown. Like, it is a security breach if you get into my X account.
Yeah, it's not great. Not great. Not a great state of affairs. Maybe that's more detrimental to our lives than Seth McLaughlin getting hurt, but we'll find out. Let's take a break, guys. When we get back, the Michigan Panic Meter for the first time with Jake Vulinec. How worried are we after the Seth McLaughlin injury about Ohio State against Michigan and another round of 4-down territory? Keep it locked. It's Spencer German, Jake Vulinec with you on Sons of the Shoe. Final segment, Sons of the Shoe, as we get you ready for Ohio State and Indiana. And we were just in our feelings, at least I was moments ago. Jake, one thing you'll learn about me is I very much overreact to Ohio State. Okay. There's only really 2 sports teams that I still get very, very emotional about. One is the Red Sox. One is this Ohio State team. And so I kind of, it comes in waves. Like I tend to read into these things a little bit more. So you'll learn that as my co-host. So it's nice to have somebody who's a little more mellow about it, trying to talk me off the ledge. And if you're wrong, I'll let you know that I was right. And, my overreactions weren't very overreactionary. But speaking of overreactions, we now move to the Michigan Panic Meter. And I want to know if either of us is going to panic about the Seth McLaughlin news as it relates to a matchup with Michigan. I have been in the dark gray for a while now. And because I'm just not that worried about Michigan. But in classic Spencer fashion, I am moving to the lighter gray. I'm in the light gray. I'm still not that worried about it. I think they're going to win. But the offensive line issues, listen, anytime you hear Michigan and Ohio State, the first thing that comes to mind, Jake, is just the fact that that team has owned Ohio State in the trenches the last couple of years. So if we go into that game knowing that they have offensive line problems, it's going to make me just a little bit more nervous about the potential to win it, even though I think Ohio State's the more talented team. Where are you in the Michigan Panic Meter?
For the love of God, put me in the dark gray. Get me out of here. No, we are not concerned with Michigan. The defense, I think, presents struggles enough that, yes, you should be concerned about what Ohio State's offense looks like. But guess what? If you can't put the ball in the end zone, it doesn't matter. Davis Warren looks garbage. Alex Orji, he's fumbling against Indiana. He can't keep things together. Their offense is horrible. It's downright bad. They cannot move the football. Even Donovan Edwards is not looking that great, right? He went from, hey, this guy looks pretty good, to
cover of college football 25.
Yeah, college football 25 cover to might not make a bowl game. Wow, that's what a great little stretch you go on there. No, we're not scared for Michigan. Yes, defense, I think, might get in, and it might be like, oh, this is scary. They have one of the best defensive fronts in football. They also have one of the worst offenses in the Power 5. They're going to be perfectly fine. It might be an ugly game. Not scared at all.
Well, we got to keep things interesting. So I moved into the light gray. All right, guys, we'll move on into our final portion of the preview show, which of course is our 4-down territory. 4 topics from around the world of college football. They can center around Ohio State, but we also like to explore some other things as well. And first and foremost, I want to start with the conversation that we sort of had with Zach earlier in the show that's just circling this week around Indiana and the fact that, it's funny because the 12-team playoff is announced, Jake. And by the way, this is for our first down. I really need to get some imaging for this where it's first down and we can play it. We'll work on that. But anyway.
It's fine. I'll just be the quarter. I'll get you ready. Don't worry. I got you.
I forgot. You have a voice that's great for that type of stuff. So yeah, we'll just have Jake do it from now on. The idea of the 12-team playoff was, I guess there obviously was the people who opposed it and didn't want anything to do with it. But those who loved it, the whole reason they loved it was like, oh, more opportunities, and this is more like all other sports, and blah 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 blah. And now we are getting nitpicky about the stupidest things because people are now mad that it's unfair to the SEC because the 2-loss SEC team is going to get left out for Indiana potentially, who only has 1 loss but a garbage schedule that they've played to this point. And I like, guys, we can't do this. Like, the whole point of 12-team playoff was you give more teams opportunities to prove it on the field. That was literally the point of this entire thing, was prove it on the field. Let the 2 conferences duke it out against each other. So now if we're going to carry the idea, if we're going to carry down the line, like this whole thing we did with the 4-team playoff of like, well, this team's more deserving than that team and blah, 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 blah. Like, this is not going to, it's going to be a mess. Just let the teams decide it on the field. If you don't think Indiana's any good, then let them go into the playoff and see what happens. But like, the idea that we're costing a 2-loss SEC team like Tennessee a chance at the title, guess what? Sorry, like, that's how it breaks. If you're going to play in that conference where it's a lot tougher and your schedule is going to be more of a gauntlet, you either got to win more of your games or you got to make more of a statement. Like, I can't control that. And the other thing is, like, people are getting mad at Indiana for their schedule. What about Texas in the SEC? Texas doesn't even have a top 25 win to this point. Indiana doesn't either. They're going to at least get a shot at that this weekend. But like, their only win that's somewhat decent was Michigan, and Michigan is a terrible team, as Jake just laid out. Their offense is garbage. So like,
who Indiana also just beat, by the way.
Right. So like, what are we talking about here? Like, why not make a bigger deal out of the team that's in your conference that also has not beaten anybody good, rather than the team that is taking the NCAA by storm with the season that they've had? It just boggles my mind.
No, like, if you're gonna complain about Indiana, like, okay, if you're in the SEC, don't lose to Arkansas. Like, what are we doing?
Right.
Like, don't lose to Vanderbilt. Like, okay, Indiana's been faced with, yes, Big Ten teams, and has their schedule been great? No. They've also dominated everybody they've played. It hasn't been like UCF, who was claiming themselves as national champions a few years ago, when they went undefeated, playing like the bums of the bums and barely beating them and just being like, hey, we were 12-0. What do you mean? Like, no, like, they're dominating every single team that they face who they should dominate. They walk in there and do what they're supposed to do. If you're going to open it up to 12 teams, you don't keep all out an 11-1 team just because SEC bias. Like, sorry, go win more games. If you want to play at the top level, go win more games. If you don't like it, apparently you can just leave now. Go ahead. Go play in Conference USA if you want to go undefeated and have a chance to be 12-0 and be the 11 seed, if that's what you want.
Like, Tennessee, like you said, lost to Arkansas, who lost to Oklahoma State, by the way. Oklahoma State doesn't even have a conference win this season. Like, what are we doing here? Like, you can split hairs with all these teams in some way, shape, or form. At the end of the day, the 12-team playoff was about proving it on the field. So if we're trying to give these teams opportunities, I think Indiana will deserve a shot at proving it on the field against some of these better teams. Listen, at the end of the day, like, 4 teams in the SEC, 4 teams in the Big Ten getting in, I'm okay with that because it's the 2 most loaded conferences. And you want to see those teams face each other and see what they can really do. I think this is it's funny though to me that, like, we all thought it was this cutesy dootsy thing in the beginning, like, oh, Indiana, they're going on this great run, like, they deserve to be in the playoff. And then the second it threatens an SEC team, everyone's like, oh, this is the most terrible system ever. Why did we go to 12 teams? Get them out of here. It's just stupid. Like, come on, man.
I feel like they were America's sweetheart, and now they're like the devil. That's what we've literally jumped from like the complete one end of the spectrum to the complete other side.
Like, they're talking about being hyperbolic. Yeah,
they're ranked in the top 5. You think they're going to be kept out because they lose to Ohio State? Like, if they go out and they lose by 40, maybe a different conversation.
Right.
Maybe a different conversation. If they lose by like 10, 15, like how we're kind of thinking, you're not keeping them out. You're not keeping them out for that.
And it's just funny too, because like the same people who are arguing like, well, Tennessee should be in over Indiana. Like, do you realize that the 12-team playoff also is the only reason that Tennessee still even has any shot at being in the playoff conversation right now too, right? Like, because if they lost 2 games, we wouldn't be sitting here like arguing for a 2-loss Tennessee team to have a shot in the 4-team playoff era.
How about this? How about this? If you were the 4 team, the SEC would have 1 team. There'd be 1 team from the SEC in right now. We'd be talking about this is Big Ten domination.
It would be Texas, who we just argued had a garbage schedule. Like, what? Like, what are we doing?
Like, in the end, like, there was a couple of 2-win teams that made it. for the most part, like you're either undefeated or you're a one-loss team, and that's what you get. And the SEC has been the complete opposite of that.
All right, we move on to our next one. Jake, take it away.
Second down.
Yeah, there we go. Staying in the Big Ten and staying with Ohio State specifically, Urban Meyer had some interesting comments in regards to Ohio State and Oregon facing each other potentially 3 times this year. His exact words were, quote, "How about this? Stare at this for a minute. So you got Ohio State. They'll beat Boise State, or at least they should. Then if they beat Miami, they're going to play Oregon for the 3rd time this season. That's a nightmare for a coach in a playoff. So they played in Eugene. They're going to play in Indianapolis probably. And then they're going to play potentially in a semifinal. Unbelievable, first time ever." I guess I understand what he's saying, like from a standpoint of as a coach, like it's a nightmare to have to scheme against a team 3 different times. And we talk all the time, right? Like in the NFL, sometimes you face your division teams, you play them twice a year, and then you sometimes cross paths in the playoffs. And it's like, it's a nightmare scenario to have to see a team 3 times. It's tough to beat a team 3 times. Hell, it's tough to beat a team twice. But like in the same vein as we're sitting here talking about like proving it on the field and all these different things, I don't see what the problem is here. Like we knew coming into the season, this could happen. And if we wanted more good games and more good matchups, like maybe it gets a little bit stale because you've seen it already, but with like higher stakes attached to it each time, in my mind, that should make the games even more exciting. No?
Yeah. Like we talked about this as an exact scenario heading into this year with Michigan. Did we not? It was like 12-team playoff. You could play Michigan 3 times. Like that was, yeah. And you were sort of like, okay, it's a little odd. But
and that was like 3 times in 3 weeks, right? Because it was like, if Michigan was good this year, you could have been playing Michigan at the end of the season just to like do the rivalry and then been playing them again as the Big Ten championship game and then played them again in the playoff potentially. So yeah, like you're right. Like it could have played out that way with the Michigan part of this.
This to me is like an Urban Meyer projection on what he actually feels about Ohio State. He's like, it's a disaster. You play Oregon 3 times. Tell me you don't think Ohio State can benefit from playing Oregon a 3rd time, right? Like, that's the only reason you'd be scared is if you don't think this team can go out and beat Oregon. Like, the better team should come out and win 2 out of those 3 games at least. Should they not?
So this actually opens up the can of worms that was a topic of conversation a couple weeks ago, and I guess still kind of is. If you get to the Big Ten championship game, I don't want to say throw it, but do you take that? Do you not like throw all your best stuff out there and like really try to beat Oregon so that they don't have a good read on like what you want to do in the potential playoff and just settle for maybe being the team that ends up playing like BYU in the first round or Boise State in the first round and then BYU? Like, I mean, it's hard because you don't know where you would fall if you lose that game, but like, do you save some things? Do you not give everything away in a game like that and actually go all out because you know you might see him again in the playoff?
You'd have to guarantee you're the 5 seed. Because then you'd play the 12. Hard thing, right? Yeah, you'd end up playing the 12, and then you'd end up probably playing like the BYU or whoever, ends up walking away with that. It's ugly, right? Yeah. I think you'd rather, in most cases, have the bye.
I was going to say, you probably just have to play for the bye. I mean, especially with the number of injuries this team's accumulated on the offensive line, you don't want to risk another one. So
also, you're Ohio State. You don't play around teams. Like,
yeah, that's fair. This isn't the 2023-24 Cavs.
Right. Yeah, you're not Jimmy Reganitz, so you get to play the Orlando Magic in the first round.
And then go 7 games with them. Yeah, no.
Yeah, and then having to play the Celtics after that. It's a real good plan. Real good plan there by Cleveland.
All right, Jake, next.
3rd down.
I love it. All right, so Deion Sanders is obviously gaining all sorts of speculation about where he could be coaching in the future, whether it's going to be at Colorado after his son graduates, whether it's going to be in the NFL. There's all sorts of smoke around this. And one of his closest friends, former teammates, and colleagues had some interesting comments about this. Michael Irvin was on FS1 with Colin Cowherd, and he was asked about whether or not Deion would take the Cowboys job if they draft Shedeur Sanders. And Michael Irvin kind of laughs, and he said, quote, 100%, and I can tell you, good sources have told me, great sources have told me that. Jake, a potential move to the NFL, particularly his former team in the Dallas Cowboys, is this what the future holds for Deion Sanders? Is this a good move for the Cowboys on top of all that, if that were to happen?
Well, the Cowboys got to do something. I mean, that team is in pure shambles. I mean, right down to the stadium, right? We're dropping sheet metal on the players. So it's a good move for Dion because if you get to move up to the NFL, I mean, congratulations, pat on the back. You now have an NFL coaching job and you get to do it with your son, which I think is a very cool scenario. I don't know how many times in NFL history we've gotten that scenario, by the way. Like a father coaching his son in the NFL. Feels like something that'd be pretty rare.
That's a good question, actually. I'd like to look that up. It's like a LeBron Bronny sort of thing going on here. I don't know.
Yeah, but like, why wouldn't you? If you're Deion and you get hired by the Cowboys, they're handing you some level of control because you're Deion Sanders. Like, they know what comes with that. Feels like a pretty good scenario on both sides for me, honestly. I think it's like the Cowboys have to have a change. They sort of had these coaches who were just like yes men, who are like, hey, we'll do whatever you tell me. We'll just ride under Jerry Jones. Like, that's not Deion. And maybe that's what you need because I don't know if Deion's going to have playoff success this year, but the Cowboys surely are not.
Yeah, no, that's definitely not happening. You know, on one hand, it's kind of funny to me that like Deion feels like he has to like ride his son's coattails. Like it's almost like he's trying to like relive the glory days through his son, which is kind of weird. Because you think about it, like his success has all come like every step of the way with his son sort of at the helm with him and Travis Hunter in that regard as well. And it's like, do you like Deion, who in his own, by his own merit, like is one of the greatest players of this game of all time. So it's just kind of funny that he's kind of living vicariously through his son if this were to happen. But at the same time, man, like it's the Cowboys, it's Jerry Jones. I don't put anything past them. I could totally see Jerry talking himself into, man, this is the splash hire we need to inject some life into this organization. Plus, I don't think Jerry says he cares about winning. And he's like, you know, Hard Knocks. He's like crying about everything he'd give to win another Super Bowl or whatever. But at the end of the day, man, like I think he just wants the Cowboys to be in like the spotlight. And they generally always are. Like they always lead first take and all these things. But you have Deion Sanders there. Like they are a walking, talking, living, breathing billboard every single day. Like there's so much to talk about with that team if Deion's there. So I could just see him making that hire because he thinks it might actually be a change of pace for the organization. But also because it brings unprecedented, which is hard to say with the Cowboys, attention to the team. But then there's also the side of it, like you said, where he likes to just hire yes men, and Deion's not going to be that. So maybe he doesn't go that route. All right.
By the way, like to that point, he's also been a good coach. Like you can't just rule out the fact that Deion's also brought Colorado like significantly up the ranks. Like they were one of the worst teams in all of college football. Yeah. And then they were there and they won 4 games last year. And now, I mean, you could be talking about like college football playoffs with Colorado.
Yeah,
like,
they're still in the mix. They are very much still in the mix. Yeah, I know. I didn't say that, but Deion does deserve a lot of credit for what he's done to turn that program around. And a lot of it too is like he's hiring the right people. Like he's putting the right people in places and in roles with the offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, all these different things. And it's worked out.
And if he hears the good words and he wants to sponsor the podcast, go ahead.
Well, he probably hated my comments initially, so I think he's probably out, but we'll see.
It's all right. I'll talk to him. All right.
Jake?
It's 4th down. Let's go. The last one, Spencer.
Our fun one, the last one is a fun one. Kent State, Akron this week took place at Kent State. Kent State is historically bad. They lost this game. I think it was 38-10 was the final score. Do I remember? Am I remembering that?
The last time I looked.
I stopped paying attention at one point. Hold on. Let's see if I can get this right. Of course, it's not popping up when I just do a quick Google search. I just want to make sure. 38-17. They added another touchdown late. How about that? Good for the Kent State Golden Flashes adding a garbage time touchdown. Jake, is this the worst team in college football history? Because everyone's talking like it is.
No, probably not. I mean, they're bad. Like, listen, they haven't won a game this year, but like, it's such a big label to put on a team. Like, there's been plenty of other teams who have gone down a deep, dark road. But I don't know. Losing to an FCS school in the midst of a winless season is like St. Francis, PA is not somebody who I think anybody on their schedule looked at and went, whoo, watch out. Like, that's the game they should have ran away with and didn't. It's tough. Listen,
so
I went to Kent for a year. I'm not looking forward to what I saw here.
I was there in person for the 2019 winless season for the Akron Zips, and I can tell you it was a miserable experience. Like I had never seen worse football in my life. It was just awful. I was standing on the sidelines, like trying to get highlights, and I was like, there are no highlights. Everything is a low light for this team. I mean, it was bad. It was sad. I have a soft spot in my heart for Akron because I worked there for several years, but like it was miserable. And people have told me that this Kent team is worse than that team. Like just everything they do is just worse. And so I don't know. I love leaning into the idea that they're the worst team ever, but that's also because I like throwing shade at Kent. So I know you're sort of you went there for a year. I can't say you're an alum, but you went there for a year.
Not
so
an alum.
You sort of kind of have some allegiances to them, but I'm gonna say that they're the worst team in college football.
They're bordering it. They're definitely bordering it. Like I've seen multiple of their games in person this year, and I really wish that I hadn't. Like, I think I've been to like 3 games, and
you can still see. That's good.
Yeah, I mean, I got glasses sitting over here to the side. I might need to start putting them on a little more often, but like, we survived it. Like, I actually saw a couple of the better games. I saw the St. Francis PA game. I think the game against Ball State where they were like, they put up like 20 points in the span of like a minute between the two teams. Like, it was good, but yeah, they're not going to win a game this season. It's going to be disappointing.
Well, they only have one left, I think. I don't even know who they play after this, but
yeah. Well, I can tell you it's a MAC school, and they're not beating anybody in the MAC. So if you didn't beat Akron, you're not beating anybody else.
Yeah, that was the battle of 2 of the worst teams in the MAC, but one just being maybe the worst team of all time. So there we go. All right, guys. We appreciate you stopping on by and spending some time with us on Sons of the Shoe. We would encourage you to like, follow, subscribe, and review and comment on the new iteration of the Sons of the Shoe podcast with yours truly, Spencer German, obviously Jake Vulinec. You can find us in Apple Podcast, the Spotify, the Odyssey app. Did I mention Apple Podcast? Just like to mention it a couple times. You can also find us if you want to look at our ugly mugs and see what Zach looks like. At the 92 The Fan YouTube channel, where you can like, comment, and get involved in the conversation there. Let us know your thoughts on the Seth McLaughlin injury. Does it derail their title hopes? Let us know your thoughts on everything we talked about today. We appreciate you guys stopping on by, as always. We'll be back Saturday, obviously, with a post-game show. Whatever happens in this game against Indiana, we'll be there to break it down with you. But until then, have a great rest of your week. And as always, go Bucks.
Go Bucks.